The overhead lights in the community center felt too bright, casting harsh shadows across the worn stage where Maya Chen stood frozen, her fingers hovering above the piano keys. She had made it exactly 4 measures into Debussy's Clair de Lune when the voice cut through the audience like a knife through silk. Sharp. Dismissive. Unmistakably condescending. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Jefferson Community Center had seen better days. Paint peeled from the corners of the ceiling, and the folding chairs creaked whenever someone shifted their weight. But to Maya, this small stage represented everything she'd been working toward for the past 3 years. Tonight was the amateur showcase, an event where ordinary people from the neighborhood could share whatever talents they'd been nurturing in private. There were going to be singers, a juggler, someone doing magic tricks, and Maya with her piano. She had arrived 2 hours early, her stomach twisted into knots that no amount of deep breathing could untangle. The upright piano on stage wasn't anything special. One of the keys stuck slightly, and the bench wobbled if you sat too far to the left. But Maya had practiced on worse. Much worse. In fact, she'd spent most of her childhood practicing on a plastic keyboard with half the keys missing, the kind you could buy at a thrift store for $10. Maya was 29 years old, though most people assumed she was younger. She had the kind of face that always looks slightly worried, with dark eyes that seemed to be constantly calculating something. Her black hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore a navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for tonight. Nothing fancy, but clean and presentable. She wanted to look like she belonged on that stage, even though a voice in her head kept insisting she didn't. By day, Maya worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized insurance company. She spent her hours staring at spreadsheets, identifying patterns in claim submissions, and attending meetings where people used words like synergy and optimization without irony. It was stable work. It paid the bills. It was also slowly draining the life out of her, one Excel formula at a time. But at night, after she'd eaten her microwaved dinner and changed into comfortable clothes, Maya would sit at the second-hand electric piano in her studio apartment and play. She'd play until her fingers ached, until her neighbors knocked on the wall, until the city outside her window grew quiet and still. This was when Maya felt most like herself. Not the nervous data analyst who apologized too much in meetings, but someone else entirely. Someone who could make something beautiful exist in the world, even if only for a few minutes. Maya had never taken formal lessons. Her parents, immigrants who'd worked multiple jobs to keep their family afloat, couldn't afford luxuries like music teachers. But Maya's grandmother, who'd lived with them until Maya was 12, had known how to play. Not professionally, just enough to accompany herself while singing old songs from their home country. She'd shown Maya the basics, how to position her hands, how to read simple sheet music, how to listen for the spaces between notes. When her grandmother passed away, Maya inherited her collection of sheet music. Yellowed pages covered in pencil marks and coffee stains, pieces by composers Maya had never heard of. She taught herself by watching free videos online, by reading music theory blogs, by spending hours trying to figure out why certain chord progressions made her chest feel tight with emotion. It was slow, frustrating work. There were no shortcuts, no easy paths. Just her and the piano and a stubborn refusal to give up. Over the years, Maya had gotten good. Not prodigy level, not conservatory trained, but genuinely skilled. She could play pieces that made her coworkers raise their eyebrows when she mentioned it at office parties. Not that she mentioned it often. Maya had learned early that talking about her passion for classical piano made people uncomfortable. They'd smile politely and change the subject, or worse, they'd say things like, "Oh, that's nice," in a tone that suggested they found it as interesting as watching paint dry. So Maya kept it private. Her piano was her secret life, the thing she did when nobody was watching. Until 3 months ago, when her friend Lisa had convinced her to sign up for the community showcase. Lisa, who worked in Maya's department and had somehow discovered her hidden talent during a company happy hour, had been relentless. "You're amazing," she'd said. "People need to hear you play." Stop hiding. Maya had resisted at first. The thought of performing in public made her feel physically ill. But Lisa had already filled out the application form, had already put down Maya's name. All Maya had to do was show up. And maybe, Maya thought, it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to find out if this thing she loved, this secret passion that sustained her through boring meetings and lonely evenings, could exist outside the walls of her apartment. Now, standing backstage and listening to a teenager finish a surprisingly good rendition of a popular song, Maya wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Her hands were sweating. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The navy blue dress suddenly felt too tight, too formal, too much like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. The teenager finished singing, and the audience gave enthusiastic applause. Maya heard the MC, a cheerful woman named Patricia who volunteered at the community center, announce her name. Maya Chin will now perform Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. Maya forced her legs to move, forced herself to walk out onto that stage under those two bright lights. The audience was bigger than she'd expected. Maybe 70 or 80 people, packed into rows of folding chairs. She recognized some faces from the neighborhood. The elderly couple who ran the corner grocery store. A family with 3 young children. Lisa was in the third row, giving Maya an enthusiastic thumbs up. Most of the faces were strangers, though. People who'd come to support their own friends and family members, who would politely sit through Maya's performance before waiting for the act they actually cared about. Maya sat down at the piano bench, careful to position herself on the right side where it didn't wobble. She adjusted the height slightly, though it didn't really need adjusting. She was stalling. Her hands found the keys, and for a moment, she just sat there, feeling the cool smoothness under her fingertips. This was it. This was the moment where her private world became public. She took a breath and began to play. The opening notes of Clair de Lune floated out into the room, gentle and melancholic. Maya had chosen this piece carefully. It wasn't the most technically difficult thing she could play, but it was beautiful. It was the kind of music that could make you feel something even if you knew nothing about classical piano. The kind of music that spoke directly to that quiet place inside where words couldn't reach. For 4 measures, everything was perfect. Maya felt herself relaxing into the music, her nervousness beginning to dissolve. Her fingers found each note exactly where it needed to be. The slightly sticky key wasn't bothering her. The wobbling bench had steadied under her weight. She was actually doing this. She was actually playing in front of people, and it felt good. Then the voice cut through the room. "Excuse me. Excuse me, this is unbearable." The music stopped. Maya's hands froze above the keys. The voice had come from somewhere in the middle of the audience, male and sharp with irritation. There was a commotion as someone stood up, a figure moving through the rows of chairs. Maya's mind went blank with panic. What was happening? Had she made a mistake? Was she playing it wrong? She looked toward Patricia, the MC, who stood at the side of the stage looking equally confused. The figure emerged into the aisle, and Maya got her first clear look at him. He was a man in his mid-50s, wearing an expensive-looking suit that seemed absurdly formal for a community center showcase. His gray hair was swept back from his forehead, and he wore small, round glasses that caught the stage lights. He carried himself with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room. "I'm sorry," Patricia said, stepping forward. "Is there a problem?" The man gestured toward the stage, toward Maya, with an expression of profound distaste. "Yes, there's a problem. I'm sitting here listening to one of the most beautiful pieces ever written for piano being absolutely massacred by someone who clearly has no business performing it." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She felt her face flush hot with shame. Around her, the audience had gone completely silent. People were turning in their seats to look at the man, then back at Maya, then at the man again. "Sir," Patricia's voice had taken on a careful, diplomatic tone, "this is a community showcase. It's for amateur performers." "I understand that," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension, but surely there are standards. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Surely we don't have to subject ourselves to performances that demonstrate such a fundamental lack of understanding of basic musical principles. Maya wanted to disappear. She wanted the stage to open up and swallow her whole. Her hands were shaking now, trembling against the piano keys. Every insecurity she'd ever felt about her self-taught skills came rushing back. He was right. She didn't belong here. She was an imposter, a fraud, someone playing at being a musician without any real training or talent. "Who are you?" Someone called out from the audience. The man straightened, seeming to grow taller with pride. "My name is Richard Westbrook. I'm a music critic for the Classical Review Journal, and I've been writing about piano performance for 30 years. I've attended concerts at Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, and the Vienna Musikverein. I know quality when I hear it, and I know the lack of it as well." He turned back to Maya, who sat frozen at the piano. "Young lady, have you ever had formal training? Has anyone ever taught you the proper way to approach Debussy? Do you understand anything about Impressionist technique, about the touch required for this kind of delicate phrasing?" Maya opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She felt tears beginning to form and hated herself for it. She wasn't going to cry in front of all these people. She refused. Richard Westbrook shook his head sadly, as if disappointed by her silence. This is precisely what's wrong with amateur performances. People think that because they can press keys in the right order, they're making music. But music is so much more than that. It requires years of study, of discipline, of understanding the composer's intent and the historical context and the technical demands of the piece. Without that foundation, all you have is noise. The audience was growing restless now. Maya could hear murmuring, see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked angry on her behalf. Others seemed uncertain, like maybe this critic had a point. Lisa was standing up, looking ready to march over and confront the man, but Maya caught her eye and shook her head slightly. "Please don't make this worse." Patricia was trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Westbrook, I appreciate your expertise, but this really isn't appropriate. If you're not enjoying the performance, you're welcome to leave, but please don't disrupt things for everyone else." "I'm not trying to disrupt," Richard said smoothly. "I'm trying to educate. This young woman clearly loves music, and that's admirable. But love isn't enough. She needs to understand that there are right ways and wrong ways to approach classical performance. She needs proper training, proper guidance. Without that, she's doing herself and the audience a disservice." Something in his tone, that absolute certainty that he knew better than everyone else in the room, sparked something inside Maya. It wasn't quite anger yet, but it was close. A tiny flame of defiance beginning to catch. He was standing there in his expensive suit, treating her like a child who didn't understand anything about music. He knew nothing about her. Nothing about the hours she'd spent teaching herself, the sacrifices she'd made to afford even a cheap electric piano, the joy this music brought her when everything else in her life felt gray and meaningless. Maya took a deep breath. Then another. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, something she used to say when Maya got frustrated during their practice sessions. "Don't let anyone make you small. You have music inside you. Let it out." "Mr. Westbrook," Maya's voice came out quieter than she intended, but it was steady. "What would you like me to play?" Richard blinked, clearly not expecting her to speak. "I'm sorry. You say I don't understand Debussy. You say I lack proper technique." Maya's hands were still shaking, but she kept them on the keys. "What piece would you like me to play? Something that would prove whether or not I have any right to be on this stage." Richard's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. "Are you challenging me?" "I'm asking you a question," Maya said. "You're the expert. You've attended concerts at the greatest halls in the world. Pick something. Anything. If I can't play it to your satisfaction, then you're right, and I'll leave this stage. But if I can play it, truly play it, then you need to sit down and let me finish my performance. The community center had gone absolutely silent again. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Everyone was watching this confrontation unfold, this strange battle between the nervous amateur and the pompous critic. Richard Westbrook smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they'd already won. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's see what you're really capable of. Since you were attempting Debussy, let's stay with French Impressionism. Play Ravel's Pavane for a Dead Princess. And don't just play the notes. Show me that you understand the color, the texture, the way Ravel builds emotional architecture through harmonic progression. Show me that you actually understand what you're doing." Maya felt her stomach drop. Ravel's Pavane was significantly more complex than Clair de Lune. It required absolute control, a perfect balance between technical precision and emotional depth. It was the kind of piece that could expose every weakness in a pianist's training. Richard had chosen it specifically to humiliate her, to prove his point in front of everyone. But Maya knew something Richard didn't. She had been working on Ravel's Pavane for the past 6 months. It was the piece she played late at night when she couldn't sleep, when the loneliness of her apartment felt like too much to bear. She'd studied countless recordings, had watched videos of master pianists performing it, had broken it down measure by measure until she understood not just what notes to play, but why those notes mattered. "All right," Maya said softly. "I'll play it." She positioned her hands above the keys, closed her eyes for just a moment, and let everything else fall away. The two bright lights, the watching audience, Richard Westbrook's smug expression, all of it dissolved. There was only the piano and the music waiting inside it. Maya began to play. The opening phrase of Ravel's Pavane emerged into the room like morning fog rolling across water. Soft, mysterious, almost fragile. Maya's touch on the keys was impossibly delicate, each note given exactly the weight it needed and no more. This wasn't the playing of someone who'd merely memorized patterns. This was someone who understood the soul of the music. The melody unfolded with patient grace, never rushed, every phrase shaped with careful attention to the emotional arc Ravel had built into the composition. Maya's hands moved across the keyboard with fluid certainty, her fingers finding harmonies that shimmered and dissolved, that created spaces of profound stillness between moments of gentle intensity. She could feel it happening, that magical state where the music took over and she became something more than just a nervous woman in a community center. Her grandmother had called it touching the divine, that moment when the boundary between player and music disappeared completely. As she played, Maya forgot about Richard Westbrook. She forgot about her fear and insecurity. She forgot about the years of teaching herself in isolation, the countless times she'd wanted to give up. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was this moment, this piece of music that Ravel had composed over a century ago, now flowing through her fingers and filling this shabby little community center with something transcendent. The middle section built with increasing complexity, the left hand carrying a steady pulse while the right hand wove intricate patterns above it. Maya navigated the technical challenges without visible effort, her body swaying slightly with the music's rhythm. She added subtle rubato, tiny fluctuations in tempo that gave the phrases room to breathe, exactly the kind of interpretive choices that separated mechanical playing from true artistry. In the audience, people had stopped moving entirely. Children sat still in their parents' laps. The elderly couple from the grocery store held hands, tears streaming down their faces. Lisa had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with amazement. Even the volunteers backstage had crept forward to listen, drawn by the sound of something extraordinary happening. Maya moved into the final section, where Ravel brings back the opening theme but transforms it, adding layers of meaning and melancholy that weren't there before. She played with such tender precision that the music seemed to hang in the air, shimmering like heat waves on summer pavement. Every note was exactly where it needed to be, not just technically but emotionally. This was music that understood loss and beauty and the bittersweet nature of memory. As she approached the final phrases, Maya allowed the tempo to gradually slow, the music growing quieter and quieter until the last notes were barely whispers. Her fingers lifted from the keys, and for a long moment, The silence that followed felt as profound as the music itself. Then the applause began. It started with one person, then spread like wildfire through the audience. People were standing, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt, some of them shouting appreciation. The sound was overwhelming, almost shocking after the intimate quiet of the performance. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still trembling, not quite believing what had just happened. She'd done it. She'd actually played the pavane the way she'd always heard it in her head, and people had felt it. She looked toward where Richard Westbrook had been standing. He was still there, but his expression had completely changed. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by something Maya couldn't quite read. Shock? Embarrassment? Maybe even a hint of shame? Their eyes met across the room, and for a long moment, neither of them looked away. The applause continued, washing over Maya in waves. Patricia was rushing toward the stage, her face glowing with excitement and pride. Lisa was pushing through the crowd, clearly intent on getting to Maya as fast as possible. But Maya's attention remained fixed on Richard Westbrook, waiting to see what the expert critic would do next. He stood there, motionless, while the celebration continued around him. Then, slowly, he began walking toward the stage. The crowd parted to let him through, and the applause gradually died down as people realized something else was about to happen. Maya's heart started racing again. What now? Was he going to find some other criticism, some other way to tear down what she'd just accomplished? Richard reached the edge of the stage and looked up at her. His face was pale, and when he spoke, his voice had lost all its earlier condescension. "I need to apologize," he said. The words carried clearly through the now silent room. Maya stared at him, not trusting her ears. "What?" "I was wrong," Richard continued. "Completely, utterly wrong. What you just played, that wasn't amateur performance. That was genuine artistry." He removed his glasses and cleaned them, a gesture that seemed designed to give him time to gather his thoughts. "I've spent 30 years reviewing professional pianists, and what you just did would stand up against many of them. The technical control, the emotional intelligence, the interpretive choices, all of it was absolutely first-rate." Maya didn't know what to say. This felt like a trap, like any moment he would reveal this was all some elaborate setup to humiliate her further. But Richard's expression was sincere, almost anguished. "Where did you study?" he asked. "Who was your teacher?" "I didn't study anywhere," Maya heard herself say. "I taught myself. I watched videos and read books and just practiced until I figured it out." The shock on Richard's face would have been comical under different circumstances. "You're self-taught?" "Completely. My grandmother showed me the basics when I was young, but after that, yes. Everything I know, I learned on my own." Richard shook his head slowly, looking genuinely stunned. "That's impossible. The level of skill you just demonstrated, the understanding of style and technique, that takes years of professional instruction." "Except it doesn't," someone called out from the audience. One of the neighborhood regulars, an older man named Joe who always wore a baseball cap. "It takes years of practice and dedication. Doesn't matter who's teaching you if you've got the passion for it." Several people murmured agreement. Richard looked around the room, seeming to truly see the audience for the first time. These weren't the sophisticated concert-goers he usually encountered. These were ordinary people who came to a community center showcase to support their neighbors and friends. And they had just witnessed something remarkable. "I need to explain something," Richard said, addressing the entire room now. "When I interrupted this young woman's performance, I did so out of arrogance and elitism. I made assumptions based on nothing but prejudice. I assumed that because this was a community showcase, because she wasn't performing in a concert hall, that she couldn't possibly have real talent." He turned back to Maya. "I was protecting my own sense of superiority, my belief that only people with the right credentials and the right training deserve to call themselves musicians. And you just proved me completely wrong." Maya felt tears forming again, but this time they were different. This time they came from a place of overwhelming emotion, not shame. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Say you'll forgive a foolish old critic for being blind, Richard replied. And then say you'll allow me to make this right. Make what right? Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. I'm still a music critic, and I still have connections throughout the classical music world. I want to write about what happened here tonight. I want people to know about your talent. More than that, he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, I know people at the conservatory. I know teachers who would be honored to work with someone of your ability. If you're interested, I can make introductions. Maya's mind was reeling. An hour ago, she'd been a nervous data analyst about to perform at a tiny community showcase. Now a professional music critic was offering to open doors she'd never dreamed of walking through. I have a job, she said weakly. I work during the day. I can't afford to quit and go to music school. Who said anything about quitting? Richard smiled, and this time it was genuine. There are programs for adult students, evening classes, weekend intensives. And there are scholarships, grants, funding for talented students regardless of their background. If you want this, if you want to pursue music seriously, there are ways to make it happen. The community center had erupted into excited chatter. People were talking among themselves, clearly thrilled by this unexpected turn of events. Lisa had made it to the stage and was hugging Maya so hard she could barely breathe. Patricia was wiping tears from her eyes. Even the children seemed to understand that something special was happening. Maya looked down at Richard Westbrook, at this man who had tried to humiliate her and was now offering her a future she'd never allowed herself to imagine. It was surreal and overwhelming and absolutely terrifying. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Richard said. But don't think for too long. Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away. The world needs to hear you play. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Maya somehow finished her original performance of Clair de Lune, though she barely remembered playing it. Other performers took the stage, but people kept coming up to Maya during the breaks, congratulating her, asking questions, sharing their own stories of hidden talents and deferred dreams. Richard stayed for the entire showcase. He sat in the back row, watching everything with a thoughtful expression, occasionally taking notes in a small leather journal. When the event finally ended and people began filing out, he approached Maya one more time. I mean what I said, he told her quietly. About writing about tonight, about making introductions. But I also want you to know something else. Maya waited. I stopped playing piano when I was 18, Richard said. I loved it, truly loved it, but I convinced myself I wasn't good enough to be professional. So I became a critic instead. I spent 30 years judging other people's performances, partly because I was too afraid to be judged myself. He looked toward the piano, still sitting on stage under those harsh lights. When I heard you playing Clair de Lune, I recognized something in your touch. A kind of self-consciousness, a fear of being exposed. It reminded me of how I used to play, and it made me angry. Not at you, though I told myself it was. At myself. At the choice I made all those years ago. That's why I interrupted you. That's why I was so cruel. I was trying to justify my own cowardice by tearing down someone who was braver than I ever was. Maya absorbed this confession, seeing Richard Westbrook in an entirely new light. He wasn't just an arrogant critic. He was someone who had given up on his own dreams and spent decades trying to make peace with that loss. Thank you for telling me that, she said. Richard handed her his business card again, making sure she took it this time. Don't make my mistake. Don't let fear or practicality or the voice in your head that says you're not good enough stop you from becoming who you're meant to be. You have a gift. Use it. After he left, Maya sat in the empty community center, the business card in her hand, her mind spinning with possibilities. Lisa sat down beside her, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. So, Lisa said, still working that boring data analyst job tomorrow? Maya laughed, surprised by how good it felt. Yeah, probably. But maybe not forever. Maybe not forever, Lisa agreed. The lights in the community center flickered, a signal from the volunteers that they needed to close up. Maya stood, took one last look at the piano on stage, and walked out into the night. The air was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear music drifting from an open window. She thought about Richard Westbrook's story, about how he'd let fear turn him away from what he loved. She thought about her grandmother, about those early lessons at an old upright piano, about the joy in her grandmother's face when Maya figured out how to make the chords resolve properly. Most of all, Maya thought about the feeling of sitting on that stage, playing Ravel's Pavane, losing herself completely in the music. That feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She pulled out her phone and looked at the business card Richard had given her, already composing the email she would send in the morning. Because Lisa was right. Maybe this wasn't forever, this life of spreadsheets and data analysis. Maybe there was another path, one that terrified her but also filled her with a hope she hadn't felt in years. Maya walked home through quiet streets, already hearing the music she would play tomorrow night. Already imagining the person she might become if she was brave enough to try. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. 3 months passed before Maya sent that email. 3 months of staring at Richard Westbrook's business card on her refrigerator, of talking herself into it and then out of it again. 3 months of sitting at her electric piano after work, wondering if she was crazy to even consider changing the comfortable, predictable life she'd built. But every time she played, she remembered that night at the community center. She remembered the feeling of the music flowing through her without fear or hesitation. She remembered Richard's face when he realized how wrong he'd been, and more importantly, she remembered his confession about giving up on his own dreams. When Maya finally composed the email, she kept it simple. She thanked Richard for his offer and said she'd like to learn more about the evening programs he'd mentioned. She hit send before she could overthink it, then immediately panicked and considered sending a follow-up email to retract the first one. But Richard responded within an hour. His reply was warm and enthusiastic. He'd already spoken with several contacts at the conservatory and had arranged for Maya to audition for their adult education program. There were scholarship opportunities available, he explained, specifically designed for talented musicians who'd come to formal training later in life. The audition was in 2 weeks. Maya told her supervisor at work that she needed a personal day. She didn't explain why, just used one of her carefully hoarded vacation days. The morning of the audition, she woke up at 5, too nervous to sleep. She practiced for an hour, then forced herself to eat breakfast even though her stomach was doing somersaults. The conservatory was located in an older part of the city, housed in a beautiful stone building that had once been a mansion. Maya arrived 30 minutes early and sat in her car, trying to calm her racing heart. She watched other people enter the building, most of them young, probably in their late teens or early 20s. They carried instrument cases and walked with the confident stride of people who belonged in places like this. Maya almost drove away. Almost convinced herself this was a mistake, that she was too old, too inexperienced, too fundamentally different from these real musicians. But then she thought about her grandmother's voice. Don't let anyone make you small. You have music inside you. Let it out. She walked into the building on shaking legs. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, with high ceilings, marble floors, and the sound of various instruments drifting from practice rooms. A receptionist directed her to the 3rd floor, where the auditions were being held. Richard was waiting in the hallway outside the audition room. He looked different than he had at the community center, less formal, wearing slacks and a sweater instead of a suit. When he saw Maya, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. You came, he said, standing to greet her. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Maya admitted. Richard smiled. That makes you braver than I was. He gestured to the closed door behind him. There are 3 faculty members inside. They're going to ask you to play something of your choosing, and then they'll probably ask you to sight read a piece they provide. Just do what you did at the showcase. Be yourself. Before Maya could respond, the door opened and a young woman emerged, looking relieved to be finished. A voice from inside called Maya's name. This was it. the point of no return. The audition room was smaller than she'd expected, with a beautiful grand piano positioned in the center. 3 people sat behind a long table, 2 women and a man, all holding clipboards and wearing expressions of polite attention. Maya introduced herself, her voice steadier than she felt. "What will you be playing for us today?" one of the women asked. She had silver hair pulled into a bun and kind eyes. "Ravel's Pavane for a Dead Princess," Maya said. The 3 faculty members exchanged glances. "That's quite ambitious," the man said. "It's not a piece we typically hear at auditions for the adult program." "It's the piece I know best," Maya replied simply. "Then please, proceed," the silver-haired woman said. Maya sat at the piano and took a moment to adjust the bench. The instrument was exquisite, far superior to anything she'd ever played. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar rush of anticipation mixed with fear. Then she began to play. This time, without the drama and confrontation of the community center performance, Maya could focus purely on the music. She poured everything into it. All her years of solitary practice, all her dreams and doubts, all the love she felt for this art form that had sustained her through so much. The pavane unfolded with heartbreaking beauty, each phrase shaped with care and understanding. When she finished, there was a long silence. Maya looked up at the faculty members and was startled to see tears on the silver-haired woman's face. The man was writing furiously on his clipboard. The 3rd faculty member, a younger woman, was staring at Maya with an expression of astonishment. "How long did you say you've been studying?" the silver-haired woman asked. "I haven't been studying formally," Maya said. "I taught myself." Another exchange of glances. The man leaned forward. "Miss Chen, we'd like you to sight read something for us." He handed her a piece of sheet music. "This is a section from a Chopin nocturne. Take a moment to look it over, then play what you can." Maya studied the music. It was moderately difficult, nothing she couldn't handle if she took her time. She placed the sheet music on the stand and began to play, stumbling only once when the key signature changed unexpectedly. When she finished, she looked up anxiously. The 3 faculty members were conferring in whispers. Finally, the silver-haired woman spoke. "Miss Chen, we'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our evening program. We'd also like to pair you with one of our most experienced teachers, Professor Morrison, who specializes in working with adult students who show exceptional promise." Maya felt dizzy. A full scholarship? With a private teacher? "We don't offer this lightly," the man added. "But your performance today was extraordinary. You have raw talent that, with proper refinement, could take you very far. The question is, are you prepared to commit to this? It will be demanding, even in the evening program. You'll need to practice several hours a day, attend weekly lessons, participate in student recitals." "I'm prepared," Maya heard herself say. "I want this more than anything." The silver-haired woman smiled. "Then welcome to the conservatory, Miss Chen. We're honored to have you." Outside in the hallway, Richard was pacing nervously. When Maya emerged, he stopped and searched her face. "Well?" "I got in," Maya said, and then she started laughing. "I actually got in. Full scholarship. Private teacher. Everything." Richard's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen from him. "I knew you would. I told them about you, about what I witnessed at the showcase. But ultimately, it was your playing that convinced them." "Thank you," Maya said. "For giving me this chance. For seeing past your own assumptions." Richard shook his head. "You gave yourself this chance by being brave enough to perform that night, by being brave enough to challenge me when I tried to diminish you. I just opened a door. You're the one who chose to walk through it." 6 months later, Maya performed in her first student recital at the conservatory. The audience included her coworkers from the insurance company, her neighbors, Lisa, and Richard Westbrook, who'd become something like a mentor and friend. She played Ravel's Pavane again, but this time under the guidance of Professor Morrison. She understood layers of the piece she'd never noticed before. The applause was thunderous. But what mattered most to Maya wasn't the recognition or the praise. It was the feeling of standing on that stage, knowing she'd fought for this moment. Knowing she'd refused to let fear or doubt or anyone else's judgment stop her from becoming who she was meant to be. She still worked at the insurance company. Still analyzed spreadsheets and attended boring meetings. But now her life had music woven through it in ways that made everything else bearable. She practiced every morning before work and every evening after. She performed at student recitals and small concerts. She began teaching piano to children in her neighborhood who couldn't afford lessons, passing on the gift her grandmother had given her. Richard attended all her performances. Sometimes after concerts, they'd go for coffee and talk about music, about life, about the choices people make and the chances they get to correct them. He'd started playing again himself, just for pleasure, rediscovering the joy he'd abandoned so many years ago. One evening after a particularly successful recital, Richard pulled Maya aside. "I've been thinking about that night at the community center," he said. "About how close I came to silencing something beautiful because of my own bitterness and fear." "But you didn't silence it," Maya said. "You recognized your mistake and tried to make it right. That takes courage too." Richard smiled. "You're generous. More generous than I deserve. But I want you to remember something. There will be other Richard Westbrooks in your life. Other people who will try to make you feel small, who will question whether you belong in spaces they think are reserved for people like them. Don't let them stop you." "I won't," Maya promised. And she didn't. Over the years that followed, Maya continued to grow as a musician. She eventually left her job at the insurance company to teach piano full-time and perform regularly. She never became famous, never played at Carnegie Hall or the great concert venues Richard had once frequented. But she built a life around music, around the thing she loved most, and that was worth more than any amount of recognition. Sometimes late at night, when she sat at her piano in the small studio she'd converted from her apartment's second bedroom, Maya thought about the version of herself who'd almost been too afraid to perform at that community showcase. The woman who'd nearly let Richard Westbrook's cruel words send her running from the stage. She was grateful to that woman for finding the courage to keep playing, for proving that she deserved to take up space in the world of music. Because in the end, that's what the story was really about. Not about humbling a snobbish critic or proving doubters wrong, though those things had happened. It was about a woman who refused to be made small, who chose to let her music exist in the world despite all the voices, internal and external, telling her she wasn't good enough. Maya had learned that talent alone wasn't enough. Neither was passion or dedication or years of practice. What mattered most was the courage to keep going when everything seemed designed to make you quit. The courage to believe in yourself when no one else did. The courage to walk through doors that weren't meant to open for people like you. As she played in her studio that night, Debussy's Clair de Lune flowing from her fingers with a mastery she'd earned through years of patient work, Maya smiled. She'd found her place in the world, not because someone gave it to her, but because she'd claimed it for herself. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.